Okay, so hello everybody. Welcome to our I don't know what episode this is for our UNICEF at UCLA project focusing on the community impacts of the migration quote unquote crisis that's happening at the southern border of the United States. In today's episode, I'm very fortunate and very honored to be joined by a very good friend of mine. Her name is Virginia, and she will be telling us her story about growing up as a part of the Latin American community and how this crisis has affected her in different ways. So, first of all, thank you very much, Virginia, for joining us. And just to start us off really simple, could you introduce yourself as well as your background?
Hi everyone, my name is Virginia. As Christine mentioned, I'm a friend of hers. We met here at UCLA. I was raised in South Central, Southeast Los Angeles, but I was born in Mexico and my family and I migrated to the US when I was still pretty young. I am considered what people know as DACA recipients or dreamers, meaning that because I was in the US from a very young age, I was able to receive some type of like legal protection, I guess would be the way to say, just to make sure that I can like travel within the US and I can go to school um, and receive some form of financial aid. Not that that's the only way to receive financial aid if you're undocumented, but it is one of the few ways. Um, so yeah, that is a little bit about me. Community service is definitely something that's really important to me. It's something that I I've been a part of for a few years now, and so I definitely attribute a lot of like my goals and my dreams to the community service that I've done within my own community, and definitely being undocumented and being a DACA recipient. There's a level of privilege that comes from that, and so I'm very much aware that I can't speak for all undocumented people. I can only really speak of like my personal experience, but yeah, I think a part of that privilege has definitely pushed me to just kind of obviously assess my privilege, but then also see what I can do with that privilege, right? In terms of educational equity, which is one of my passions, I would say.
It's really great to hear. So, you mentioned earlier that you grew up in Southeast LA. So, how do you think this quote unquote crisis has impacted your growing up and especially your community, which I understand from you is the majority like Latin American. So how has the community really been impacted by the media that surrounds this crisis, so called, and all the rhetoric that goes around, whether it's politically or like socially?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I am a DACA recipient, and so I feel like most people when they think of undocumented people, they have very specific images, right, or like stereotypes. So they either have like this image of like bad people that come to the country or like good people, right, and like the good people being uh, the DACA students, right? Like the DACA recipients and the ones that were here from a very young age. But I feel like because that's all the media really talks about, they tend to kind of leave out a good amount of who the undocumented population in the U.S. is, right? Like we see everybody talking about undocumented people, and the first thought is like these young kids, right? But like they forget that these kids aren't kids anymore because there was a cutoff date. A lot of DACA recipients are older, like myself, for example. I'm 21, almost 22. Um, and then again with like the whole migration quote unquote crisis, right? That's been going on, it's definitely led to a lot more public conversations. And so, as I'm speaking from the perspective of a DACA recipient, that's definitely one of the, it's often used as a bargaining chip of sorts, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, like, well, if you want to help this group of people, then, you need to give us this money for this wall, right? And then it's also led to conversations outside of the US, right? In Mexico, for example, which is the country that I'm from, I have this specific memory of like maybe 2 years back. Um, they were interviewing, residents of Mexico, and they were making comments about how, if dreamers or DACA recipients were to ever be deported, like they'd be okay with it because they need dishwashers and like they need people to do like, a specific form of labor, and so you see how there's kind of like this negative connotation to being a dreamer, not only in the US because, you're kind of like looked down on and kind of pitied, but also like in other countries, there's also like this conversation going on about how like, you know, I don't know, like you're not enough of one specific nationality. And so it's like you're not really from one place, if that makes sense. Like you're not wanted in one country, but then in your home country, you're also not wanted. So, there's like that conversation going on of like, well, where do we really fit in? And then there's also the conversation of like, well, undocumented like students and dreamers, like we don't make up the entire undocumented population in the US. So that kind of takes away from the larger picture. And then definitely something else. Like you mentioned, like I am from South Central, Southeast LA, and so we are mostly Latin Americans. And I can truly say that in this like these last couple of years, there's been more um, people moving from Central America rather than like just Mexico, which is what I would see when I was younger. It was just people from Mexico, right? But now you see people from El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. So it's been very interesting kind of seeing how that's kind of switched around. Whereas before, Mexicans were like the people who were migrating the most to like LA and this part of LA. Like now you see more Central Americans. And so that just kind of goes to show how like the political and social climate in Central America has gotten worse and pushed for, more waves of migration. I also work really closely with high school students. And so I work in high schools in South Central LA. And again, like the students that I work with, they are people who have moved from Central America these last few years. And so, kind of just like hearing their stories and the things that they have to go through to get to the US has been really impactful. And just seeing how, again, like instead of it just being people from Mexico that are migrating, it's again like more people from Central America. So that's been really interesting. And yeah, like like we talked about, I was raised in the US, and so there again there's like this whole level of privilege that I have just being born in the US and speaking English and coming to a pretty good university and just being in the position that I am by being like a dreamer and having that DACA status. Like it's definitely pushed me to like assess my privilege a lot more because my story is like not the only story. And so just again working with students and seeing just hearing their stories, it's very inspiring, and just like all the things that they had to go through to just get to the US, right? And how like they had to travel on their own, and just yeah, it's very inspiring to say the least.
Yeah, it's it's really nice to hear, honestly. I mean, as an international student, I've always been very open about how uneducated I am about this subject matter. And Virginia, you've always been someone that I've had a lot of admiration and respect and just yeah, like I love you deeply and all the things that you've done for our club, all the things that we've like done together as friends, as teammates, like it's been amazing and like I can't imagine the life that you've lived, but despite that, like I admire you and respect you so much for it. So thank you for joining me today and for sharing your story. We will definitely do our best to give it the right platform and bring these stories like to light. So thank you so much for sharing your perspective on this issue, this quote unquote crisis, for lack of a better term, that the media has decided to label it. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And just like I said, right, like my story is like one of many, right? Like it's a very, for lack of a better word, like a very traditional story, right? Of like, I came here at a very young age. I was raised here, I go to school. But there's definitely like a lot of it's a very deep issue, very complex issue, and I think it's great that, you're all taking the time to kind of learn about this, and I encourage everyone to learn about it. Um because yeah, like the moment you look into what it is that people have to go through to come to this country, it's pretty dark, right? And I think
Yeah.
we all we all have some type of like privilege that we could all use to just amplify their voices and make that journey for them a lot easier because again, like it's dark and it's very heavy and it's very complicated. But yeah, thank you for inviting me. And again, I really encourage everyone to like look into it.
Okay, thank you so much.